There you're welcome to HisGov TV. My name is Colin Nanaya Abebrese, and in today's lesson or video, we are going to discuss the 1960 First Republican Constitution. The first Republican Constitution in Ghana, 1960 First Republican Constitution. But before we begin with our discussion, I would like us to look at our lesson objectives for today. Now, our lesson objectives for today would be that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the term Republican system of government. Okay, so what do we mean by a Republican system of government? And also, the second one, you should be able to identify the features of the 1960 Republican Constitution, the 1960 Republican Constitution, the features, and also state the functions of the president, which is the executive, the legislature, as well as the judiciary under the 1960 Republican Constitution. So let's begin with our discussion. Now, for the 1960 Constitution was the first Republican Constitution of Ghana, and that Ghana became a republic on the 1st of July in 1960 after a successful referendum in April 1960. Now, the 1960 Constitution of Ghana, introduced a republican system of government, which was modeled on that of the British parliamentary and the American presidential system of government. Now, the republican system of government is a practice in which the head of state is elected by the people for a fixed term of office, and that is what we mean by a republican system of government. All right, so the head of state or the president is elected for a fixed term of office. The 1960 Republican Constitution was promulgated on 1st July 1960 with Kwame Nkrumah assuming the office as the first president. So that makes Nkrumah the first, president of the first Republic of Ghana. All right, good. So now let's take a look at the features of the 1960 Republican Constitution. Now, the first feature of the 1960 Republican Constitution was the creation of the executive. All right, so the 1960 Republican Constitution created a presidential system of government with executive powers vested in the president as the head of state and also head of government. Now, that is, the Constitution established a monocephalous executive, with the president performing both ceremonial as well as real executive functions. Now, the president was made responsible to the people of Ghana as he was to be elected into office by a majority of the electorate, and so that is the executive function, a president who will be elected based on a number of terms by the electorate. Now, let's take a look at the functions of the executive, under the 1960 Republican Constitution. Now, one of the functions of the executive or the president under the 1960 Republican Constitution was that he was the head of cabinet, and we will later explain for the cabinet. Now, the president was the head and chairman of 8-member cabinet created by the Constitution, and the function of the cabinet was to assist the president, in the administration, in administering the affairs of the state. Now, the president presided over meetings of the cabinet and also was empowered together with the cabinet to formulate and implement policies and programs for smooth administration of the state. And that is for the functions of the president. Now, the second function of the president was assenting and veto of bills. Now, the president was empowered by the 1960 Constitution to assent all bills passed by Parliament before it could become law. And the president was also, given power to veto parliamentary bills if are found not to meet certain criteria or expectations. In the third function of the president under the 1960 Constitution was appointment of ministers. And so the president was also vested with the power to appoint ministers of states to help him run the affairs of the state. All right. Now the president had the mandate to appoint ministers of states within Parliament. So the president for the ministers that the president was going to appoint were supposed to come from Parliament, and so they were supposed to be MPs. Now the last of the functions of the president was power to reshuffle. The president also reserved the right to reshuffle his cabinet ministers by replacing them with new appointees, or changing their portfolios. And that is the president, the president could assign, ministers of state to different, ministries, or even dismiss them if he found them to be incompetent. And this is what a lot of people were calling on the Akufo-Addo government to do, and it was almost, it seems impossible. Now the next feature of the 1960 Constitution was the provision of cabinet. It also provided for a cabinet. Now the cabinet, or the Constitution, provided for the establishment of a cabinet, and this cabinet consisted of not less than 8 ministers. All right, 8 ministers, and they were to be appointed by the president or from the National Assembly. Now the cabinet was in charge with the responsibility to direct and control the day-to-day administration of the state, and the cabinet was also empowered with general directions and control of government administration of the state. And the cabinet was also chaired by the president, and that is the president also presided over the deliberations of the cabinet. Good. Now another feature of the 1960 Republican Constitution was the establishment of the legislature. Now the Constitution also provided for the setting up of a unicameral legislature to be known as the National Assembly, or Parliament, with membership of 104 elected by secret ballot based on universal adult suffrage. And now we have more than 104. We have close to like 274 or so. Now the legislature was to be presided over by a speaker who was to be elected by members of Parliament. All right. Now the speaker may either come from within or without Parliament. And the members of Parliament were to be also elected in a single constituencies with a single lifespan of 5 years. And today, I think they have 4 years, and the two Constitution provided for 5 years, right? Yes. Now let's take a look at the powers of the 1960 Republican Constitution. So let's take a look at the functions of the legislature. All right. Now lawmaking. So the first one was lawmaking. Now the legislature was in charge of lawmaking. So the Constitution charged Parliament with responsibility of making and amending, and also repealing of laws. All right. Also, electoral college. Another function of the legislature was also electoral college. Now, Parliament was made to serve as an electoral college to elect a president to run the affairs of the state when it became necessary for them to do so. All right. Now, the next one was also for the control of state funds. Now, Parliament was charged with also the responsibility to control state funds, and then also, to see how the government is spending the state fund. And also annual budget. They also review the annual budget of the president, and that was the function of the cabinet. Of the legislature. Now let's take a look at another feature, or the last feature of the 1960 was for the judiciary. Now, the 1960 Constitution also provided for the judiciary. Okay. Now, the Constitution established a judiciary arm of government, and it made it independent from the executive and the legislative organs of government. So, under the 1960 Constitution, the judiciary was made to be independent. Now, the judiciary, of course, consisted of superior courts and as well as inferior courts. Now, the superior courts were made up of the Supreme Court, for the Superior Court, as I said, was made up of the Supreme Court, for the Court of Appeal, as well as the High Court. All right. The Inferior Court was also made up of the Circuit Court, the District Court, for the juveniles, for the tribunals, and other stuff. Now, let's take a look at the functions of the judiciary before we bring our discussions to an end. Now, we will look at that of the Supreme Court, for the functions of the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court was the highest court in the country and the final court of appeal, okay, in all civil and criminal cases. Now, the Supreme Court was also empowered to deal with all matters also relating to the interpretation of the provisions of the 1960 Constitution. Okay, again, the Supreme Court also had a supervisory jurisdiction over all the other courts in the country. And again, the Supreme Court also had the power to make orders and also issue writs or give directives to the lower courts. So good. These are some of the features of the 1960 Constitution. And I know that you have learned something. If you have any question, you can share with us in the comment section, and we will do that for you. Thank you for your time and have a nice day. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel.